Hey, everybody. I'm Jorge Edwards of fantasyandframes.com, and welcome again to Behind the Frames, our weekly fantasy show that we do here on Twitter and on Facebook Live. Happy to be here with you today. We've got really cool topics to talk to you about, but first, let me introduce the cast and crew. I give you Mr. Aaron Pags, aka Fantasy Triage. Aaron, how you doing?
Of course, it's a beautiful night to talk live and save fantasy football lives.
Absolutely. And then, of course, Nate Markham, how are you?
I'm doing great, guys. What's happening?
Just trying to get by, as everybody else is out there. Hope everybody's safe and sound. So again, we're behind the frames. Let's get into it, folks. The Four-Eyed Championships. We started promoting this last Saturday. As you all know, we have this is our charitable tournament that we're going to be hosting this year. We have some, not to name drop, but I'm going to go ahead and name drop a few people.
Name drop.
Yeah. We have people like Joe Pizzapia, Bob Lung, Mike Wallert, who's an IDP expert from 4for4.com, Anthony Servino, the real NFL guru. Heck, even Scott Fishbowl 8 champ Stompy. Stompy is going to be in the tournament. By the way, Stompy, great new video that you just put out there. We got writers from Fantasy Alarm, the Fantasy Footballers. Of course, you got the three of us, plus Ken, who are going to be the individual division commissioners. And of course, most importantly, you, the Four-Eyed fans, are also competing in this tournament. A lot of great charities are being represented. Like I said, we started promoting this last Saturday, and we're already 60% full, which is an amazing. It just goes to show you how great of a community this fantasy football community is.
Thank you all. Overwhelming response. Awesome.
No, thank you very much. And of course, we have our four divisions, and I'm just going to go through them quickly and then tell you how many spots are remaining in each division. First, we have the Tina Belcher division from Bob's Burger, which I didn't know that show is actually so popular. I guess I'm really behind the times with that stuff. But Aaron, that's your division. Buddy, out of 12 teams, you have one spot remaining. That's pretty impressive.
Who wants it? Hit me up at Fantasy Triage. Hit me up right now. I'll get you in.
Followed by, then we have the Hans Moleman division with Ken. He's not here tonight. He has 3 spots remaining. Then, of course, Nate, you're the Hank Hill division. Mm-hmm. You got 5 spots remaining. And, of course, I'm the Meg Griffin division with 7 spots remaining. Man, the hate for Meg Griffin, I thought it was contained to just Family Guy, the TV show. But apparently the rest of you just really don't like Meg Griffin. Like, she's really that unpopular, as a cartoon character. Who knew? So we're announcing some changes to the Four-Eyed Championships. We are switching the platform from ESPN to Sleeper. So we're going to be switching to the Sleeper platform to run the tournament. And, of course, if you go to fantasyandframes.com, click on the image for the Four-Eyed Championships, you can read all about the roster sizes, how we're going to be scoring. That information will come up over the weekend, as well as where you can go and sign up for the Four-Eyed Championship. So we're really looking forward to you all joining. Again, 60% full.
It doesn't cost Jorge. Sorry, it doesn't cost you anything. We are actually giving away the money to charities.
Yeah.
So you don't have to pay an entry fee. Go to the website, go to fantasyandframes.com, click on the Four-Eyed Championships link, sign up, get in this super tournament with all these great experts and fans alike. So
no, that's exactly right. Go ahead, Nate.
No, I was just saying, if they have, you guys haven't even seen. All I've done is I've gotten the sketch for the trophy or trophies plural for the overall winner and then each divisional winner. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be one of the best trophies. I hope that I win because I won it. I might just make myself a trophy and say best commissioner trophy and just have it for myself. Might be my only way with the amount of competition we have, but it's going to be wonderful. I mean, it really will.
No, seriously, like when I was inviting a few people over the past few days, the number one question is like, how much is this going to cost me? Like Aaron, like you said, like, what do I have to do? And the thing is, we're taking care of that for you. We're going to, we'll find a way to make the donations. We're going to raise money on our GoFundMe page, which is active for the overall league champion. But this is really just your opportunity to just fight for your charity. You know what I mean? Like fight for giving something back. And I think that's something that, we as a community and, as a world can rally behind. Mm-hmm. All right. And with that, let's just get into our show topics for today. First of all, we have a comment from Jeremiah Dawson on Facebook. I'm getting those trophies, he said. So apparently, Jeremiah, if you're listening, you are talking trash already. All right, let's get into some relevant fantasy news right now. The Seahawks are potentially interested in Antonio Brown. Aaron, what are your thoughts on Antonio Brown and the Seahawks?
Okay. You know how we always talk about these things. Redraft only, right? If you are in a super deep redraft league, like we're talking 30 plus roster spots, something like that. I mean, when you're drafting the third and fourth wide receivers from teams, this is a league format that you'll be looking to take a stab this early on Antonio Brown because, right, we all know that some kind of suspension or something is going to be handed down by the league when Antonio Brown decides that he was going to want to sign with a team for real. Sounds like reports say that this signing probably happened sometime mid-season. So this is something to watch, news to watch, and most specifically, news on the other receivers on these teams that are interested in him.
No, absolutely. There was an article by Brad Gagnon of Bleacher Report that came out talking about how Antonio Brown would be such a good fit for Seattle. It's a tougher division, so therefore Seattle will need, the upgraded wide receiver. They had really too many close games. I don't think they had a win that was more than 7 points. Don't quote me on that one, but I think that's what was in the article. And of course, he was talking about his comparisons of having Antonio Brown and DK Metcalf on the outside with Tyler Lockett going back to the slot. And let's think about the last time Antonio Brown was paired with another second-year wide receiver. I'm talking about Juju Smith-Schuster in Pittsburgh. Look, I'm not going to say that DK Metcalf is Juju Smith-Schuster, but let's just for the sake of comparison, do just that. What do you call it? In his second year, Juju Smith-Schuster averaged 15.1 fantasy points per game on the outside, opposite Antonio Brown, with Antonio Brown drawn coverage. Antonio Brown still put up 18.1 fantasy points per game in that year in 2018. DK Metcalf in 2019 last year, in his rookie season, put up had 100 targets for 58 receptions and 900 yards. In 2018, Juju Smith-Schuster, in his second year, put up 166 targets, 100 receptions for 1,400 yards and change. Look, the opportunity is there. This is, if there was ever an opportunity for a second-year wide receiver to take that step to get that opportunity for one-on-one coverage, I think this could be really good for DK Metcalf if Antonio Brown, in fact, goes to Seattle. Not so much for Tyler Lockett going back to the slot. He becomes more of that boomer bust guy that he's always been previously, even though he led the Seahawks in targets last year. Obviously, that would go down with Antonio Brown there. But, people were already high on DK Metcalf to begin with going into this season. Adding Antonio Brown there to take the pressure off, I think that would be a huge boost for DK's ceiling and value. All right, so then let's go to the next bit of news that came out yesterday. Tom Brady practicing with Gronk and Godwin. Nate, what are your thoughts there?
Well, let me start off with welcoming Tom. Congratulations. If you guys are following along in our under 1,000 follower competition that we had, the votes, obviously you two were paired up against each other.
Congratulations, Jorge.
Yeah, congratulations, Jorge. You got two winners on here. Tom took me down. I don't know how he's doing today. I haven't had a chance to check recently. I think he's crushing it. Tom Bomb.
You got Tom Bomb, dude. You got Tom
Hey,
Bomb.
that's okay. You know what?
Tom is here. He's on Periscope right now, and he's putting up some comments here.
Hey, if
Welcome, Tom.
I'll take you. Get beat by the best is always not too bad of a defeat. But so what does it mean? Godwin practicing with Brady? Correlation to the Julian Edelman talk. Everybody wants to go straight to the slot receiver. The one thing that I think is fascinating to me with digging a little bit deeper is that I felt like before I looked in and looked at last year that I thought that there would be disparaging and quite a bit of difference between Winston and Brady overall in terms of actual performance and scheme between the two. And I look, and it's crazy is that if I look last year, it's Brady averaged 38 attempts a game, 5th overall. Winston, 39.1 for 4th. The difference between the two, the deep ball. The benefit, though, which is going to help Mike Evans more than obviously Godwin, even though Godwin actually has more, he averaged about 2 to 3 more deep ball attempts, deep routes than Edelman did, is that Brady's deep ball completion percentage was top 10 in the league last year. So with those attempts, you make the best of what you got. The air yards per attempt at 3.6 versus Winston's 5.2. Again, everything funnels towards that short underneath route, which is where Godwin's going to feast. We don't even need to talk about Gronk. Obviously, we know what that is. If Gronk's on the field, Gronk will do what Gronk does.
Right. No, I mean, we all, we know Brady, Gronk, what that, what that has translated into from a fantasy perspective. But I want to go back a little bit to what you were saying as far as drawing the comparisons, as far as slot wide receivers are concerned. Julian Edelman last year for the Patriots with Tom Brady led the league in targets from the slot. Since 2013, in half PPR scoring with Brady, 13.2 fantasy points per game. And in PPR, or as I like to call it, the everybody's fantasy relevant scoring setting, yes, I am biased against PPR, he averaged 16.4 fantasy points per game. Now, Godwin with Jameis Winston last year had 68 targets from the slot, okay? But combine that with all his other stats, he was averaging 16.6 fantasy points per game just in half PPR alone and close to 20 points per game in PPR. Now, he's currently on Fantasy Football Calculator in 12-team leagues, half PPR, the wide receiver 6. So he's behind Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams, Hopkins, Tyreek, Julio, and ahead of Mike Evans. I know it's June. And I know a lot of the news that we hear about, you shouldn't really put too much stock into when it's June, when it's so early in the season. But for me, hearing that he's already practicing with Brady and developing that rapport makes me more and more comfortable drafting him as my number one wide receiver on my roster going into the 2020 season. Aaron, do you have anything to add to
It's interesting, right? Because we talk about these guys, and now it sounds like everyone has like their own angle going here with the news of Brady, Gronk, and Godwin. And my angle is on the Brady side. How much of a boost is this going to be for Tom Brady that we're not even really we're overlooking that here with him working with Godwin and Gronk and Evans and Nate? You did a great job comparing his season to Jameis Winston's season and how comparable, minus the deep ball that they were. Tom Brady's not throwing 30 interceptions, okay? And if Tom Brady puts up a season similar to Jameis Winston with 30 INTs was the top 5 fantasy quarterback last season. Brady was I think he finished 12 or 13th, depending on your scoring. And so Brady, I mean, legit with this core and already building, despite maybe not do this while the COVID thing is busting out all over the country, but building this rapport with his new wide receivers and plugging him into that offense, take away those interceptions, Brady could easily finish a top 5 quarterback. And what we're looking for is an advantage. And when you're waiting on quarterback, Tom Brady's one of those targets this year for sure.
Absolutely. Speaking of slot wide receivers also, I want to give a shout out to Todd Barnes. You can find him on Twitter at Todd, TODD1006. He's one of our newer fantasy football writers here at Fantasy and Frames, and he's been writing in our 4-Ed matchup series. Basically, he's been covering the slot wide receiver. He has 5 articles out. He has another 2 on the way just talking about slot wide receiver matchups and using that knowledge of how the slot wide receiver is used to help win you fantasy games, fantasy championships. Give him a follow. Todd1006 on Twitter. Todd Barnes, we love your work here at Fantasy and Frames. Speaking of work at Fantasy and Frames, Mr. Markham, you're our new IDP writer. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I guess, trial by fire. There's no better way than to dig deep, but it's great. I got to tell you, me being an offensive, more minded fantasy person, if that's what you want to get so descriptive at, understanding the defensive side can only help. I mean, obviously,
ask for a raise. Yeah, ask for a raise in front of everybody.
Right.
You are deserving of it. Going back to what you're saying, we had Mike Wahlert on for a 3-part series before the draft talking about IDP values going into the 2020 season. And we kind of just threw you into the flames, didn't we?
Hey.
But it was, I think you'd agree, it was a fantastic opportunity to learn about the other side of the ball. That we love IDP so much here at Fantasy and Frames. There are IDP positions in the 4-Ed championships. You know, the linebackers, the defensive back, the defensive lineman. We have 2 IDP flex spots. You know, so it's important. You know, we feel that you appreciate both sides of the ball. Now, Nate, you're heading up our 4 Eyes on IDP article series. You've put out articles talking about IDP rookies, both in the NFC and AFC. You've talked about scheme changes in 2020 and how that affects IDP players. And this week, you recently put out your first divisional preview for IDP, specifically talking about
the AFC East.
The AFC East. What can we expect for you next week? Just out of curiosity.
I'm going to go to the stay in the AFC. I'm going to go to the AFC North, which is, it's digging deep between, just picking through Pittsburgh alone and Baltimore. I got to tell you, the more TJ Watt and Patrick Queen, if I'm not giving away some of my IDP picks for anybody in my division, they're terrible. I would never draft them for anything. They're not going to produce, and leave it at that.
Okay.
I have a pretty bad poker face, obviously.
Jorge threw you into the IDP fire, and your plastic Barbie hair came out on the other side. All right.
Oh God.
For those who don't know, Nate was assigned to the Barbie division today by Scott Fish for Scott Fishbowl. So,
and the 9 pick.
You kind of knew you had this coming. So thank you, Scott Fish, again for keeping us entertained in episode 3 of Behind the Frames. Okay, so with that, let's get into our topic for the day. I had mentioned we were switching to the Sleeper platform. And Aaron, you remember last year we had our listener league on the Sleeper platform. It's a great platform. You can chat with all your league mates. It's a fun time. It's a very interactive platform. But one of the things that we like about it the most is it gives you a lot of ability to change, common scoring or league settings. So let's talk about changing up your league settings in your league in fantasy football. I'll just give you a great example. In the 4-Ed championships, tight ends, just to help them make them a little bit more relevant, because tight end is a wasteland in fantasy. We're giving them an extra half point per reception. So essentially, tight ends are PPR valuable because it is a half PPR, tournament. But it makes us wonder, like, what other aspects, of fantasy football, I shouldn't say aspects. It makes you appreciate the fact that there are so many different types of variation when it comes to league settings and scoring settings in fantasy football, and how, maybe your league has been playing for years and it's the same people winning over and over again, and it's just not a lot of fun for you. Why not switch things up? Why not make things a little bit different? Scott Fishbowl, they have, speaking of Scott Fishbowl, they have tons of scoring variations, and some of them change from year to year. Some of them are still the same. But Aaron, I want to get your thoughts rather on why people should switch up their scoring settings.
I'll put me on the spot. Let's start first. If you enjoy playing your league settings and they are not the same as everyone else's, that's awesome. That if you play in a league that is touchdowns only, invite me, because I'd be interested in playing in that league. There is no one right way to play fantasy football. I will say it's very interesting that we have this take on fantasy football, yet 97% of the leagues fall into either PPR, half PPR, or standard scoring. And then it's kind of blanket minus the, the scoring for a reception, which seems to be the oddest thing to me when I really see the overall picture here, right? Why should you change? You should always change if, you don't enjoy playing it. There's, the biggest reason why we play fantasy football is obviously for enjoyment. So get your league mates talking about it. You might not be the only one who thinks, man, Nate freaking wins this league every year. We got to switch something up, because he's obviously cracked our scoring system. So let's outvote him. Let's come up with a scoring setting that, no one's played, or just tweak it just a little bit. So Nate has to go back and, do the same work that you're doing every year, trying to figure out how to maximize your scoring.
Nate, what are your thoughts on the topic?
No, and I agree 100%. And I think the one thing, if I'm going to expand on that at all, is that the majority of the reason why people are successful in their specific league is because I think they understand the rules, take advantage of understanding the actual scoring system. That's kind of fantasy 101, but so many people skip over that because they just assume it's you skip past tackling in football drills because it's not fun, and learning the rules might not be fun, but winning is fun. And if you know the rules better than everybody else, there's a good chance that you're going to win and do well. I've looked at some of the leagues where they have these nuances, and if you can take full advantage of that, I mean, it puts you at a distinct advantage over everybody else. But like Aaron said, if you're not having fun, I don't think that there's any reason not to change it. Don't do it just because the norm says you have to have. Well, standard leagues aren't the norm. Everybody does PPR. Every magazine that I get at, we have Schnucks here, whatever the grocer is there in your locale. I'm name dropping Schnucks.
Stepmom Lauren knows what you're talking about.
Yes, she does. Yes, she does. And she would probably not buy a magazine from a grocery store because that's probably fantasy rule 102 is don't buy stuff that was printed in February. Or, well, whenever the dates are. That's more baseball. But you get the point. I digress. Jorge, what is your take? You're the one that's setting these rules. You're the one, or help collectively.
No, it's just fun to change things up every once in a while. Like we keep saying, playing in stagnant leagues, that's not fun for everybody. And that's really what I wanted to do with the 4-Eyed Championships is I wanted to make it something unique that you don't really see often, like I said, the introduction of IDP, the tight end bonuses. Jeremiah, yes, know your scoring settings. That is the number one thing you should do for all your leagues. Jeremiah Dawson on Facebook. No, yeah, you're absolutely right. I enjoy the variation. It's playing fantasy football is not so much. It's not just about setting your lineup, doing your research on players. It's about knowing your opponents. It's about knowing how they're thinking. And you all have a common frame of reference, which is the overarching outline of what the league is and how you play in the league. So it's just as much as mental warfare playing against your league mates, knowing the scoring settings as it is playing against them when you're just setting your lineups from week to week. So I really enjoy it a lot. Aaron, you said I thought you were going to mention a few things.
Yeah, okay. I don't want to throw a whole wet blanket on this, change your settings. I think it's a great idea if you're bored with your league. What I would caution against is going too crazy, obviously, first of all, and also rewarding position. The tight end thing has always kind of irked me, and the anti-quarterback thing has always kind of irked me, right? Because when we're playing fantasy football, what do you want to see? You want to see points, and you want to see the stars do well. You don't want to see Ryan Tannehill. You want to watch Patrick Mahomes. You want to watch you want to see the stars. You want to see Aaron Rodgers. You want to see the guys you want to have some interest in guys like Adam Thielen. And if you're a Bears fan and you pick Thielen, you want to root for Adam Thielen.
Vikings.
No, I'm saying as a Bears fan,
right.
You want to be interested in Adam Thielen. And, sometimes I feel like we press the issue to make sure that all positions are equal, or that we need to pay attention to more tight ends. Why do we need to pay attention to more tight ends? This is my thought in baseball all the time. Why do we need catchers? We don't need catchers, man. There's 2 catchers that we need to watch hit. That's it. And and outside of that, same thing in tight end, man. At tight end, there's 5 tight ends that really are exciting to watch. And the rest of them are basically just extra blockers who run some routes every once in a while and catch little dump offs. That's not to me, that's not exciting. And sometimes, I feel like we're being forced, and I don't like that. I don't like being pigeonholed or turned in a certain direction with league adjustments similar to what we're doing. And, I'm cool with it. We've got to draft this really large roster, and, I understand the take behind it if you're going to have a tight end position. So maybe this is for a whole nother a show about why we need to have tight ends at all. It's like the kicker argument. You just can keep whittling it down to, hey man, I want to see the best players play. I want to see, I want points for highlights. I want touchdowns. I want that's what we want to watch. We don't want to watch a 3-yard run by Sony Michel. No offense, Jorge.
Well, let me ask you two something. As far as, so there's a large contingent of people, myself included in some capacity, that want to see a direct correlation or a direct comparison between fantasy sports and actual sports. So what they're saying is, I want the penalty. So, and I know you're shaking your head no, and I don't disagree with you in certain scenarios. I think that there can be a combination of the two. Like, for instance, the one rule that I really do like is the -4 for an interception. Because ultimately, if you're comparing real football to fantasy football, an interception that results on a drive, wherever they're at, obviously a pick six being worth -6 in like Scott Fish Bowl and certain other leagues that I've been in, that I like that comparison. I don't necessarily like to say that it has to be. I don't want it to be so directly related to football that there are people that are like, this is real, this is fantasy. I want to be a real GM and I want to be as close to the real thing as possible. Well, then you know what? It's probably not my cup of tea for that specific style, but the points for a first down, that's beneficial. You did more good than just a 3-yard scamper. If a running back, goes out wide and catches a 4-yard pass, that's worth 1.4 points. But yet if a quarterback gets a first down on 3rd and 7 and keeps a drive going, they win the game, that's worth 0.6. I mean, or 0.7, whatever the number is. I'm not doing math right now, but we get the idea. There should be some combination. I don't think this necessarily has a direct relationship to league settings necessarily, or the tight end premiums or whatever we want to go by. But are you guys intrigued? Aaron, I think I know your answer already. But Jorge, do you like that comparison between real and fantasy?
Oh, absolutely. Like when we're giving our analysis and we're doing our research on players, like what do? We look at real football stats. We look at real football trends, and we try to draw that correlation between that and fantasy performance. Going back to what Aaron said really quickly, going against tight end premiums, this is the point of having this conversation, is that everyone can have their own opinions behind stuff. We're doing tight end premium because that's a popular thing that a lot of people in the masses enjoy playing out there, but there are people who don't. Aaron's included. I to a certain degree agree with that as well. But going with what you were saying, Nate, yeah, I love studying the different facets of how a player plays. Oh, and by the way, going back to one more thing, Aaron, if Ryan Tannehill, if you're watching, I am a fan and do want to see you on TV. So thank you very much for a fantasy football championship in one of my leagues last year. But going back to what you're saying, Nate, let's go back to Scott Fish Bowl, using that as an example, talking about scoring settings. Okay. Pass completions in Scott Fish Bowl is half a point. Okay. Pass incompletions is -1 point. That makes me appreciate a quarterback like Derek Carr, whereas I would normally not appreciate Derek Carr.
Name drop.
Right.
I wouldn't exactly name drop at Derek Carr. Is that his Twitter handle? I don't even know.
Sure.
We'll say that it is.
Yeah.
But it makes me appreciate the player. And I think one of the things that we lose sight about is we enjoy the output. We enjoy the numbers that go on with fantasy stats and fantasy points. But, doing or having scoring settings like these really make you appreciate the player, what they go through, how they prepare, how they fit into their team. It just gives you a whole new perspective. And so I think with more changes, it gives you more opportunity to learn more about different things. And, who doesn't like learning,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want the last word here, so someone else say something after this. I want points. That's all I want. I don't care what the score of the game is. I want people to score touchdowns. I want them to continue to score touchdowns. Heck, if there was a way that the actual NFL could award points to a team based on the fantasy points of that team, I would be all for that, because that is exciting. You
want winners. You want to win. You, sir, are Mike Singletary of the San Francisco 49ers when it comes to fantasy football. I totally
I just love fantasy sports, man. That's
I did. You and us three.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we love it. All right, so that basically wraps up Behind the Frames episode 3. Like I said in our first episode, we don't want to make this a little bit too long. We appreciate you guys watching and listening. We've had over, I want to say 1,500 views for the past 2 episodes. That is ridiculous. That is a lot more than we were expecting going into this, but we just love talking about fantasy, answering your questions, and just bringing up the conversations that just need to be brought up. So stay tuned later on this week at Fantasy in Frames. We have our AFC North Divisional Preview Pod with Michael Bowers from Dynasty Rewind. Our next Rapid Triage article will come out on Friday, where we're covering one important fantasy question from the Cincinnati Bengals. And then, of course, we're going to have the return of the Boring Players article series on Saturday. Jeremy Noble will be heading that up where he's going to be talking about boring players in the AFC South. Gentlemen, awesome time.
Excellent.
And to all you 4-Eyed fans, stay safe. We'll see you next week.
Cheers.